Check your project directory, make sure it's set to a folder called AtMorphs under Advanced Facial 2. Double-click that to make it active, click OK. Let's go to File and load our first object in the scene, which is PM_head. Now this object is going to provide all of the moving data points that goes on to the final rendering object, and this is going to have its duplicates applied back on top of itself. Sounds confusing enough? Let's give it a go. Let's clean up the scene. Let's delete the light out of the scene and its children and mark the camera invisible so we don't have to see it. So now we have the default camera lights. He's facing forward on Z. And let's duplicate him. Right click, copy selected objects, and name this one something meaningful. Name something meaningful like jaw. Now they're duplicate morph targets. There's only one model in the scene, but it's being duplicated several times. Let's go into setup. Let's switch to a side view. And let's connect both of these objects together. So I go to the effects, select Morph Blender from the pull down menu, select PM Head, and add the Morph Blender effect to that. From here, the cluster create block that's underneath the cluster when you pick it is going to have a pull down menu, pick PM Jaw, and convert that to the cluster. So now we have a morph target that's linked to this Morph Blender effect. Create a new slider, add that morph target to the first pull down underneath the target tab so that it shows up in here, and crank it to full. Do the same thing inside animate mode. Now we called this AfterTransformMorphs because the morph is going to be the same model moving around inside the scene, and we're going to mask that off to create different distortions on the original mesh. To do that, go to the Morph Blender block and make sure that target uses transformed points. Means it's going to check for any translate, rotates, or scales on the morph target first, and then move the points from the original mesh to that. Once you have that, if you pick PM Jaw and rotate it, this morph target is now controlling the original mesh by translating the morph target around, scaling it, rotating it, etc. Reset the keyframe on that, and go back into setup. Switch to the pivot mode inside our jaw morph target. Now the pivot applies its value negatively to the translate to keep the model in the same spot. In this case, our pivot point for the jaw is going to be right below his sideburns. Now it puts values into the move and values into the pivot that are identical. That will cancel out any translations on the model, keeping it in the same spot. Once this pivot point is selected, we need to mask out this object so that only the jaw will move instead of the entire character moving around as we translate. So go to Tools, let's add a meta effector to the scene. We'll just call this one Jaw ME. Make sure to select the head. Since we're dealing with identical morph targets here, it doesn't matter if we pick the head or pick the morph target for the draw weight. Go to the weight list, create an active drawing object, go back to meta effector and add an effector field to the scene. Let's position that right over the jaw, the chin area. Set this radius to a small value like 0.01 meters. I'm using the tab key to move between the different fields, and set the field of influence to all connected so that wherever it intersects a point it tries to find the entire submesh. Now we have a weight that's going to be applied 100% from the slider, and anywhere that there is no weight it will ignore any transform effects. So back to the cluster slider. Underneath this first morph target, if you go to the weight tab, we can pick Jaw ME, our meta effector, and it is going to be a combination weight, which means it's going to check in setup what meshes are connected and how their weights are affected, and then use that for the morphing action. So if we go back into animate now and pick our jaw morph target, our pivot point is set where the jaw should be, and we pivot, our jaw now moves as if we had added a different effect to it. But it's a morph target, which means we can also take this morph and blend it back down to nothing. So we can blend this morph, and we can change how this morph works on the character. You see we've only done the 50% morph, so if we crank it all the way over, it starts to shrink. So reset that key. Let's set our morph target to 100%, and we don't have to worry about that. So this is how the jaw is set. We can go back in with more meta effectors and smooth out the variations on the face here. But I'm just going to leave it as it is right now so we can move on to the next section. Let's go to File, and we're going to save this scene as atmorph1.fxs.